In the primitive wilderness of the Ozark Mountains in 1857, when the vast frontier stretched endlessly beyond the reach of civilized law and the dense forests held secrets that predated European settlement by centuries, persistent whispers circulated among the scattered settlers about the existence of a bloodline so wild, so intertwined with the shadows, that they were known only by the name of the Wampus Cat Inbreds. Born from Cherokee legend and Appalachian fear, these creatures were rumored to be half-human, half-feline descendants of a cursed Cherokee woman, the original Wampus Cat, condemned to roam the wilderness as punishment for revealing sacred secrets she was never meant to hear. The story began 23 years earlier, in 1834, when the Cherokee still held domains in the Arkansas Territory before their forced removal along the Trail of Tears would scatter the tribes westward into lands they had never seen. Running Sun, now an elderly Cherokee medicine man living in exile deep within the Ozark wilderness, was the keeper of the original tale that had transformed from tribal warning into frontier nightmare over the passing decades. Ezra Whitman, a determined settler from Ohio who had claimed a valley homestead in the remote reaches of Stone County, Missouri, first heard the legend from Running Sun during a chance encounter while hunting deer along the Buffalo River in the early autumn of 1857. The old Cherokee, ancient beyond measure, with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of generations, spoke reluctantly of events that had transpired during his youth, when the balance between the human and spirit worlds had been disrupted by curiosity and disobedience. "White man who builds where spirits walk," Running Sun said in his careful English, learned from traders and missionaries. "You have chosen a place where the old curses still have power. The shadow walkers who move through these hills are not animals that hunt for food or territory. They are the children of a woman who learned truths that were forbidden, and her punishment became a heritage that grows stronger with each generation." The medicine man explained that in 1834, a Cherokee woman named Evening Sky had violated the most sacred taboo of tribal law by secretly listening to the men's spiritual ceremonies. Disguised beneath the hide of a mountain lion, she had killed and skinned for the purpose. These rituals, conducted only during the new moon, when the barrier between worlds grew thin, involved communion with animal spirits and the invocation of powers that could transform human nature itself if improperly channeled. Evening Sky had been discovered during the ceremony by the tribal shaman, who recognized immediately that her unauthorized presence had contaminated the sacred ritual and released forces that would have terrible consequences for all involved. Rather than executing her immediately, which would have been the traditional punishment, the shaman chose a fate that seemed more appropriate to her crime. He bound her spirit permanently to the mountain lion hide she had worn, transforming her into something that was neither human nor animal, but a cursed hybrid of both. The transformation that first night was violent and agonizing, witnessed by the entire tribe as Evening Sky's body twisted and reformed according to the conflicting natures now warring within her flesh. Her bones lengthened and shortened, her muscles reconfigured to accommodate both upright walking and four-legged running, and her senses sharpened to supernatural acuity, while her human reasoning became clouded by predatory instincts that grew stronger with each passing hour. But the shaman's curse had been crafted with even more terrible precision than the initial transformation revealed. Evening Sky retained enough human consciousness to understand what she had become, yet lacked the mental discipline to control her new nature. More significantly, the curse was designed to be hereditary, ensuring that any children she might bear would carry the hybrid traits in their blood, passing the abomination to future generations who would be condemned to live between worlds without belonging to either. Driven from the Cherokee territory by her transformation and the tribe's horror at what she represented, Evening Sky fled into the deepest wilderness of the Ozark Mountains, where the few white settlers who encountered her created legends of a creature that walked upright like a human, but moved with the fluid grace of a great cat. Over the years that followed her exile, she mated with various men, some Cherokee outcasts, some white trappers and hunters, and some who were themselves touched by supernatural curses that made them outcasts from civilized society. Each child born from these unions carried some degree of the hybrid characteristics, though the manifestation varied dramatically based on the father's nature and the circumstances of conception. Some appeared almost normal, with only subtle feline traits that became apparent under stress or during the full moon, while others were born with obvious deformities that marked them as inhuman from their first breath. As these children grew to maturity and began reproducing among themselves, for they were rejected by both human and Cherokee communities and had nowhere else to turn for companionship, the hybrid traits intensified rather than diminished. The isolation of their mountain territory forced brother to mate with sister, parent with child, and cousin with cousin, creating a closed genetic pool where the cursed characteristics accumulated and mutated into forms that grew progressively more distant from human normalcy. By 1857, when Ezra Whitman established his homestead in the valley that bordered their territory, the Wampus Cat clan had existed as a distinct breeding population for over 20 years, developing their own primitive society based on behaviors that combined the worst aspects of human cunning with feline predatory instincts. They had learned to use simple tools and weapons, developed a rudimentary language of clicks and growls that supplemented their limited human speech, and most disturbing of all, had evolved feeding habits that included human flesh as a preferred delicacy. Running Son's account provided Ezra with his first understanding of why the local wildlife behaved so strangely in certain areas, why native Cherokee avoided specific valleys and ridges even when hunting was scarce elsewhere, and why the few trappers and hunters who had vanished in the region over the past decade had left no traces that conventional tracking could follow. The old medicine man's warning proved prophetic when Ezra discovered the first physical evidence of their presence only days after their conversation. While checking traps along a creek that ran through the lowest part of his property, he found tracks in the muddy bank that defied easy categorization. The prints showed characteristics of both human feet and cat paws, with elongated toes ending in what appeared to be retractable claws, and a gait pattern that suggested the ability to switch between bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion as circumstances required. More disturbing than the tracks themselves was the arrangement of stones and sticks around the area, formed into patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random natural occurrence. The configurations resembled territorial markers used by predatory animals, but incorporated elements that indicated symbolic thinking and possibly even primitive religious concepts related to their hybrid nature. As Ezra examined the evidence with growing unease, he noticed that his horses had become increasingly agitated, refusing to graze in certain areas of his pasture and displaying the nervous behavior typically associated with the presence of large predators. His hunting dogs, normally eager to investigate any unusual scent, whined and retreated when brought near the tracks, suggesting that whatever had made them carried a smell that triggered deep instinctual fear. That night, as autumn darkness settled over the Ozark hills with the early onset that characterized the shortening days before winter, Ezra heard sounds from the forest surrounding his cabin that confirmed his worst suspicions about the nature of his new neighbors. The calls that echoed across the valley were neither fully human nor completely animal, but rather a chilling combination that suggested intelligence and communication while remaining utterly alien to civilized understanding. The sounds continued throughout the night, growing closer to his cabin as hours passed, accompanied by the rustling of undergrowth and occasional glimpses of yellow eyes reflecting firelight from windows. By dawn, Ezra had made the decision that would define the rest of his stay in the Ozark wilderness. He would learn everything possible about the creatures that shared his territory, document their behavior and capabilities, and if necessary, find ways to defend himself and his family against predators whose hybrid nature made them far more dangerous than any natural wildlife the frontier had produced. The autumn of 1857 brought an early frost to the Ozark Mountains, creating conditions that would force both settler and creature into closer proximity as the search for food and shelter intensified with the approaching winter. Sarah Whitman, Ezra's wife of 15 years and mother to their 3 children, was the first to notice that their domestic animals were exhibiting behavior patterns that suggested the presence of predators unlike anything they had encountered during their previous frontier experiences in Ohio and Kentucky. Their milk cow, normally placid and reliable in her routines, had begun refusing to leave the barn area after sunset, lowing anxiously and pressing against the wooden walls whenever darkness fell. The chickens huddled together in the center of their coop, rather than roosting normally, and most significantly, their 2 hunting dogs, a pair of experienced hounds who had tracked bear and wildcat through the Ohio wilderness, now refused to venture beyond the immediate clearing around the cabin once the sun began setting behind the western ridges. These strange behaviors are getting worse each night, Sarah reported to her husband as they prepared for another restless evening of animal disturbance and mysterious sounds from the surrounding forest. Yesterday I found claw marks on the barn door that don't match anything I've seen before. Too large for a bobcat, wrong shape for a bear, and made with something that can reach higher than any 4-legged creature should be able to manage. Ezra's investigation of the barn door revealed scratches that confirmed his growing suspicions about their nocturnal visitors. The marks were deeply scored into the hardwood planks, made by claws strong enough to gouge the timber, but arranged in patterns that suggested they had been made by a creature capable of standing upright and using its forelimbs with deliberate precision, rather than random scratching. More disturbing was the discovery of additional evidence around their property that indicated systematic observation rather than casual animal curiosity. Small piles of stones had been arranged near the corners of their cabin, positioned to provide concealed vantage points from which the building's interior could be watched through windows and gaps in the chinking. Broken branches and disturbed undergrowth created pathways that allowed silent approach from multiple directions. While the absence of normal forest sounds in these areas suggested that local wildlife had learned to avoid zones where more dangerous predators regularly traveled, the situation escalated dramatically on the morning of October 12th, when Ezra discovered that one of their steers had been killed during the night in a manner that defied explanation through conventional predation. The animal, a mature bull weighing over 800 pounds, had been brought down not through the throat-crushing attack typical of mountain lions or the claw and bite wounds characteristic of bear attacks, but through methods that indicated both bestial strength and human-like intelligence in their application. The steer's throat had been opened with cuts too clean and precise to be made by teeth or claws alone, suggesting the use of sharp tools wielded by something capable of understanding anatomy and the most efficient methods for causing rapid blood loss. But the killing had also involved claws and teeth, with evidence that the creature had fed on the fresh carcass while it was still warm, consuming organs and muscle tissue in patterns that resembled both human butchering practices and feline feeding behavior. Most unsettling was the discovery that parts of the carcass had been removed from the kill site, apparently carried away for consumption elsewhere or storage for future use, behavior that indicated planning, capabilities, and possibly food preservation knowledge that went far beyond instinctual animal responses to a successful hunt. Ezra spent the better part of that morning examining the kill site and tracking the signs of whatever had been responsible. following a trail that led from his pasture into the dense timber covering the ridge above his valley. The tracks he followed showed the same hybrid characteristics he had noted earlier. But now he could see how the creature moved, sometimes on 2 feet like a human, sometimes on all fours like a large cat, and most remarkably sometimes using its forelimbs to swing from tree to tree with an agility that suggested adaptations for arboreal locomotion. The trail ended at a rocky outcropping where the tracks disappeared onto stone, surfaces that retained no impressions, but the location provided Ezra with his first clear view of territorial markings that confirmed the intelligence and organization of whatever was sharing his mountain. Trees had been clawed at specific heights to create visual markers. Rocks had been arranged in patterns that suggested boundary definitions, and most significantly, crude shelters constructed from branches and animal hides indicated the presence of a social group rather than a single predatory animal. It was during his examination of these territorial signs that Ezra had his first direct encounter with one of the creatures whose existence Running Sun had described and whose evidence he had been cataloging for weeks. The meeting occurred without warning, as the creature seemed to materialize from shadows that should not have been deep enough to conceal anything larger than a rabbit. The being that confronted him stood approximately 5.5 feet tall when upright, but its proportions were wrong for a human in ways that triggered immediate revulsion and fear. Its limbs were too long for its torso. Its fingers ended in retractable claws that extended like switchblades when it sensed threat, and its face combined human and feline features in a combination that violated every natural law Ezra had ever accepted. The creature's eyes were the most disturbing aspect of its appearance, large and yellow like those of a nocturnal predator, but holding an intelligence that was unmistakably human, despite the alien context in which it was displayed. Those eyes evaluated Ezra with the calculating assessment of a thinking being, not the instinctual reactions of a wild animal. And in that evaluation, he sensed both curiosity and predatory intent. For several minutes that felt like hours, man and creature regarded each other across 20 feet of forest clearing, each waiting for the other to make the first move that would determine whether the encounter would end in communication, combat, or flight. The creature's nostrils flared as it assessed Ezra's scent. Its ears twitched to analyze sounds from the surrounding forest, and its muscles tensed in preparation for explosive movement in any direction circumstances might require. The standoff ended when the creature made a sound that combined human speech with feline vocalization, producing words that were recognizably English but distorted by vocal cords that had been modified for non-human purposes. "Mine," it said in a voice that was simultaneously childlike and bestial. "Mine place. You go now, or you become mine too." Before Ezra could respond, or even fully process the implications of hearing human language from something that was clearly not human, the creature dropped to all fours and vanished into the undergrowth with the liquid grace of a large cat, leaving only the lingering scent of wild animal musk and the disturbing memory of intelligence burning behind yellow eyes. That night, Ezra shared his encounter with Sarah and began making preparations for what he now understood would be an ongoing confrontation with neighbors who possessed both the intelligence to plan coordinated attacks and the physical capabilities to carry them out with devastating effectiveness. The creatures were not simple animals that could be driven away with noise and fire, nor were they humans who might be reasoned with or intimidated by superior weapons and numbers. They were something entirely new in his experience, thinking predators who had retained enough human intelligence to use tools and strategies while gaining the physical advantages of creatures evolved specifically for hunting and killing. The combination made them potentially more dangerous than any threat the American frontier had yet produced. And Ezra realized that survival would require understanding their capabilities and limitations while developing countermeasures. that could protect his family from neighbors, who viewed them as territorial invaders at best and potential prey at worst. As winter approached and resources became scarcer, the encounters would inevitably become more frequent and more aggressive, forcing both settler and creature into a confrontation that would determine who had the stronger claim to survival in the harsh wilderness of the Ozark Mountains. By November 1857, reports of unusual incidents throughout the remote reaches of Stone County had attracted the attention of Dr. Augustus Crawford, a physician and naturalist from Springfield who specialized in documenting anomalous biological phenomena on the American frontier. Crawford's reputation had been established through his previous work cataloging deformities among isolated frontier populations, studying the effects of limited gene pools and harsh environmental conditions on human development in communities cut off from outside genetic influence. When word reached him of settlers reporting encounters with creatures that displayed characteristics of both human and animal nature, Crawford recognized the opportunity to document what might be the first recorded case of systematic hybridization between human and non-human species in North American wilderness conditions. His scientific curiosity, combined with his medical training's emphasis on empirical observation over folklore and superstition, drove him to organize an expedition that would investigate the claims with proper documentation and analysis. Crawford arrived in the Ozark region with two assistants, Samuel Morrison, an artist skilled in biological illustration, and Thomas Garrett, a photographer equipped with the latest camera equipment, capable of providing visual evidence that could withstand scientific scrutiny. The team established a base camp near Ezra Whitman's homestead, using the settlers' first-hand knowledge to guide their exploration into areas where the hybrid creatures were most likely to be encountered. The expedition's first major discovery occurred when they located the primary territory of what appeared to be an organized clan of the hybrid beings, centered around a complex of natural caves in a limestone ridge system known locally as Shadow Valley. The valley itself seemed almost designed by nature to provide perfect conditions for a secretive population. Sheer rock walls that limited access to a few easily defended passages, freshwater springs that provided reliable water sources, and dense forest cover that offered concealment and abundant hunting opportunities. Morrison's artistic documentation of the valley's geography revealed evidence of deliberate modification by intelligent beings who understood principles of defensive positioning and resource management. Trees had been felled to create barriers across approach routes. Rocks had been moved to create concealed observation positions, and most significantly, the cave entrances had been modified with constructed barriers that could be opened from within, but were nearly impossible to breach from outside. But it was Crawford's direct observation of the hybrid beings themselves that provided the most scientifically significant findings of the expedition. Through careful stalking and the use of concealed observation positions, the research team was able to document a breeding population of approximately 35 individuals displaying various degrees of human-animal hybridization that seemed to correlate with the number of generations. Removed from the original transformation, the clan's social structure appeared to be matriarchal, organized around several females who displayed the most pronounced feline characteristics and seemed to exercise authority over males and offspring through dominance behaviors that combined human social dynamics with feline pack hierarchies. These matriarchal figures were the most dangerous members of the group, possessing not only the physical capabilities of apex predators, but also the strategic thinking necessary to coordinate group hunting activities and territorial defense. Crawford's medical examination of evidence left behind by the clan, shed hair, claw marks on trees, and regrettably partially consumed remains of their prey, revealed systematic changes in bone structure, muscle development, and sensory organs that represented genuine biological adaptation rather than simple deformity or disease. The hybrid beings had evolved specialized characteristics that gave them advantages in their forest environment, while retaining enough human traits to use tools and engage in complex planning. Most disturbing to Crawford's scientific objectivity was the discovery that the clan's diet included human flesh as a regular component rather than an occasional supplement to more conventional prey. Analysis of bones found in their refuse areas revealed that they had consumed at least 12 human victims over the previous 2 years, selecting targets that included isolated travelers, hunters who ventured too far into their territory, and most horrifying, children who had wandered away from frontier settlements. The hybrid beings demonstrated sophisticated hunting strategies that utilized their unique capabilities to maximum advantage. They could track prey through dense forest, using senses sharpened beyond human capacity, move through terrain that would be impassable to normal humans, and coordinate attacks using communication methods that combined vocal signals with scent marking and visual cues that their hybrid senses could detect over considerable distances. Morrison's illustrations documented the clan's use of primitive tools that had been modified to accommodate their hybrid anatomy. Spear points hafted to handles, shaped for hands that bore retractable claws. Cutting implements designed for fingers longer and more flexible than human digits, and most ominously, butchering tools that showed evidence of regular use in processing both animal and human carcasses for consumption and preservation. The photographer Garrett's attempts to capture images of the living creatures proved largely unsuccessful due to their nocturnal habits and extreme wariness of unfamiliar scents and sounds, but he did manage to document their territorial markings, tool artifacts, and the bone refuse that provided evidence of their systematic predation on both wildlife and human victims. Crawford's detailed notes revealed that the hybrid characteristics were not randomly distributed among clan members, but showed clear patterns of inheritance that had intensified through multiple generations of interbreeding within the isolated population. The original Cherokee curse had created genetic changes that were passed to offspring, but the closed breeding pool had concentrated these traits rather than diluting them, resulting in individuals whose human and feline characteristics were more pronounced than those of their ancestors. The most severely affected clan members displayed anatomical modifications that included extended limbs adapted for both bipedal and quadrupedal locomotion, enlarged canine teeth suitable for tearing flesh, enhanced night vision that allowed effective hunting in complete darkness, and muscle development that provided strength and agility far beyond normal human capabilities while retaining the fine motor control necessary for tool use, perhaps most significantly for understanding their potential threat to frontier settlements. Crawford observed that the clan's reproductive practices were producing offspring who showed even more pronounced hybrid traits than their parents. The females typically gave birth to litters of 2 to 4 young, similar to feline reproduction patterns, and these offspring developed their hybrid characteristics from birth, rather than acquiring them through later transformation. The expedition's final and most unsettling discovery was evidence that the clan was not unique in the region. Territorial markings and communication signs indicated contact with at least 2 other hybrid populations in adjacent mountain ranges, suggesting that the original curse had affected multiple Cherokee women, or that the hybrid trait was spreading through contact with other isolated populations. Crawford's scientific report, completed after the expedition's return to civilization, documented the existence of a new type of predatory species that combined the worst aspects of human intelligence with enhanced animal capabilities, creating beings that posed unprecedented threats to frontier expansion and settlement. His recommendations included immediate military intervention, to eliminate the hybrid populations before they could spread further, establishment of buffer zones around known territories, and intensive research into methods for detecting and countering their unique capabilities. However, Crawford's rational scientific approach had failed to account for the hybrid clan's own intelligence and adaptability. His expedition had been observed throughout its duration, and the creatures had learned valuable information about the civilized world's interest in their existence, knowledge that would influence their strategies for dealing with future human intrusions into their territory. The stage was set for a confrontation between frontier civilization and a new type of predator that possessed advantages no previous native, American or wildlife threat had ever commanded. The ability to think like humans while hunting with capabilities that surpassed any natural animal the American wilderness had produced. The publication of Dr. Crawford's scientific report in early 1858 created shockwaves throughout the military and civilian authorities responsible for frontier security, leading to the deployment of federal troops under the command of Captain James Bradley, a veteran Indian fighter whose previous campaigns against hostile tribes had established his reputation for decisive action against unconventional enemies in challenging terrain. Bradley's mission was clear: eliminate the hybrid threat before it could spread to other regions or develop capabilities that might make future military intervention impossible. The military expedition that assembled at Fort Smith, Arkansas, in March 1858 represented the largest concentration of federal forces deployed against a non-human enemy in American history. Bradley commanded 50 soldiers drawn from frontier units experienced in wilderness warfare, supported by Cherokee scouts who possessed intimate knowledge of Ozark Mountain, terrain and tactical expertise developed through generations of warfare against both human and animal adversaries. But Bradley's conventional military thinking had not prepared him for an enemy that combined human intelligence with superhuman physical capabilities and an intimate knowledge of terrain that provided advantages no previous adversary had possessed. His initial strategy, based on successful campaigns against Native American resistance, focused on locating the enemy's primary settlement and launching a coordinated assault that would eliminate their leadership and scatter their forces. The first engagement between federal troops and the hybrid clan occurred on March 15, 1858, when a patrol led by Sergeant William Hayes encountered 3 of the creatures while reconnoitering approaches to Shadow Valley. The brief but violent confrontation provided the military with their first hard lesson about the inadequacy of conventional tactics against enemies who could move through forest terrain with impossible speed and agility. The hybrids attacked without warning from concealed positions in the forest canopy, dropping onto soldiers from above with the silent precision of hunting cats, while using crude but effective weapons that maximize their natural advantages. Their claws could penetrate military-issue clothing and inflict wounds that bled profusely. Their enhanced strength allowed them to overpower men who should have been able to defeat them through superior training and equipment. And most dangerously, their ability to move silently through dense undergrowth made them nearly impossible to track or target effectively. Sergeant Hayes' report described enemies who fought with coordinated tactics that indicated military-level planning but employed methods that no human adversary would have been capable of executing. They moved through terrain that would have been impassable to normal humans, communicated through vocal signals that could be heard over considerable distances without revealing their positions, and demonstrated knowledge of human weaknesses that suggested careful observation and analysis of military behavior. 3 soldiers died in that first engagement, killed by wounds that military surgeons had never encountered, deep parallel cuts that suggested claws capable of penetrating to internal organs, bite marks that indicated teeth designed for maximum tissue damage, and evidence of consumption that confirmed the hybrids' cannibalistic feeding practices. 2 additional soldiers were severely wounded and had to be evacuated to Fort Smith for medical treatment that military physicians were unequipped to provide. Bradley's response to this tactical defeat involved deploying his forces in smaller, more mobile units that could respond quickly to hybrid attacks, while avoiding the mass formations that had proven vulnerable to assault from above. He also implemented new rules of engagement that treated the hybrid creatures as enemy combatants rather than wild animals, authorizing lethal force in all encounters and establishing procedures for coordinated responses to their unique tactical capabilities. The hybrid clan's reaction to the military presence demonstrated strategic thinking that surprised Bradley and his officers. Rather than retreating deeper into the mountains or attempting to avoid contact with superior forces, the creatures launched a systematic campaign of harassment that targeted not only the soldiers but also the civilian settlements that supported the military operation. Isolated farmsteads throughout the region came under attack from small groups of hybrids who used their enhanced sensors to locate vulnerable targets and their superior mobility to strike without warning before disappearing into terrain where mounted pursuit was impossible. Livestock were killed or stolen. Buildings were damaged by creatures strong enough to tear apart wooden construction. And most terrifyingly, human civilians began disappearing under circumstances that suggested they were being taken alive for purposes that military intelligence could only speculate about. The psychological impact of these attacks on frontier settlers proved as significant as their military effect. Families abandoned homesteads they had worked for years to develop, fleeing to larger settlements where numbers provided some protection against enemies who seemed capable of appearing anywhere without warning. The exodus of civilian population eliminated potential intelligence sources for the military while creating refugee problems that strained the resources of established communities. Bradley's attempts to locate and assault the hybrid clan's primary stronghold were frustrated by their superior knowledge of cave systems and mountain terrain that provided numerous concealed positions and escape routes. Traditional military tactics that had proven effective against Native American resistance were useless against enemies who could disappear into underground passages that human soldiers could not navigate, retreat vertically up rock faces that required climbing equipment, or simply vanish into forest terrain where their camouflage abilities made them nearly invisible even at close range. The turning point in the conflict came in May 1858, when Bradley's forces discovered that the hybrid threat was larger and more organized than his initial intelligence had suggested. Coordinated attacks on military patrols indicated communication and planning between hybrid groups separated by considerable distances, while captured weapons and equipment showed evidence of systematic looting from multiple engagements that had not been reported through official channels. Reconnaissance missions revealed territorial markings and trail systems that connected at least 3 separate hybrid settlements in different mountain ranges, suggesting a total population that might exceed 100 individuals with varying degrees of hybrid characteristics and combat capabilities. Most disturbing was evidence that the clan was actively recruiting or capturing humans for purposes that included both breeding stock for expanding their population and food sources for sustaining their numbers. Through winter months, when conventional prey was scarce, the military campaign that had begun as a simple elimination mission had evolved into a complex counterinsurgency operation against enemies who possessed advantages that conventional warfare could not effectively counter. The hybrid creatures' ability to live off terrain that could not support normal human populations, their superior senses and physical capabilities, and their apparent immunity to the diseases and environmental stresses that affected regular troops, made them nearly ideal guerrilla fighters in their chosen environment. By autumn 1858, Bradley had reached the conclusion that complete elimination of the hybrid population would require resources and time commitments that exceeded the military's willingness to invest in what was officially classified as a minor frontier security issue. His final report recommended establishing containment zones around known hybrid territories, implementing warning systems for civilian populations in affected areas, and developing specialized tactics and equipment for future encounters with similar threats. The unofficial result of the military campaign was a tacit agreement between the federal forces and the hybrid clan. Human settlements would be established beyond certain geographical boundaries, while the creatures would restrict their activities to designated wilderness areas where civilian contact could be minimized. This arrangement left both sides unsatisfied, but provided a workable framework for coexistence that would persist for decades. The hybrid creatures had demonstrated that they possessed capabilities and organization that made them nearly impossible to eliminate through conventional military means. While the human forces had established that large-scale hybrid expansion into settled areas would trigger responses that could threaten their long-term survival. The stalemate that emerged from this mutual recognition would shape the region's development for generations to come. The uneasy truce that concluded Captain Bradley's military campaign in 1858 marked the beginning of a new phase in the relationship between human civilization and the hybrid creatures that had claimed the deepest wilderness of the Ozark Mountains as their permanent territory. Over the following decades, the Wampus Cat clan continued to evolve and adapt, developing characteristics that carried them progressively further from their human origins, while establishing themselves as a permanent element of the regional ecosystem that influenced both wildlife patterns and human settlement development. Throughout the Arkansas-Missouri border region, Dr. Augustus Crawford, whose initial scientific expedition had triggered the military intervention, returned to the Ozark region multiple times between 1860 and 1890 to document the continuing evolution of the hybrid population and assess the long-term implications of their presence for both local communities and the broader understanding of human adaptation to extreme environmental pressures. His follow-up studies revealed that the clan had not only survived the military campaign, but had actually increased in numbers and geographical range, establishing satellite communities in remote areas of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The hybrid creatures' reproductive success appeared to be accelerating rather than diminishing over time, with each new generation showing more pronounced non-human characteristics than their parents. Crawford's analysis suggested that the original Cherokee curse had created genetic changes that intensified through selective breeding, producing individuals who retained human intelligence while developing physical capabilities that exceeded those of any known animal species. By 1870, Crawford documented hybrid specimens who demonstrated abilities that seemed to violate natural laws, strength that allowed them to leap vertically more than 20 feet, speed that enabled them to outrun horses over rough terrain, and sensory capabilities that permitted effective hunting in complete darkness or the detection of human presence from distances that exceeded a mile. Most remarkably, they had developed natural camouflage abilities that made them nearly invisible against forest backgrounds, even when observed from close range by experienced woodsmen. The clan's social organization had also evolved to accommodate their expanding population and territorial range. The original matriarchal structure had developed into a complex hierarchy that combined elements of human tribal organization with feline pack dynamics, creating a system that could coordinate the activities of multiple communities across hundreds of square miles of wilderness. Terrain communication between distant hybrid communities was facilitated through methods that combined vocal signals audible over long distances, scent marking systems that could convey complex information to clan members while remaining undetectable to human observers. and visual symbols carved into trees or arranged, with stones that served as permanent message systems for coordinating seasonal activities and territorial boundaries. Perhaps most disturbing from the perspective of frontier security, Crawford's later studies revealed that the hybrid population was actively working to expand its numbers through the capture and transformation of human subjects, rather than relying solely on natural reproduction. Evidence suggested that isolated travelers, particularly young adults and children, were being taken alive to hybrid communities, where they underwent processes that induced gradual transformation into hybrid beings over periods that might extend for months or years. The transformation process appeared to involve systematic exposure to hybrid bodily fluids through bite wounds, consumption of hybrid tissue through forced feeding, and psychological conditioning that broke down human identity while encouraging the adoption of hybrid behavioral patterns. Subjects who survived this process emerged as functional hybrid, beings who retained enough human memory to serve as intelligent sources about civilized communities, while developing the physical capabilities necessary for survival in the hybrid lifestyle. Reports from the 1880s and 1890s indicated that these artificially created hybrids were particularly valuable to the clan because they possessed detailed knowledge of human settlements, transportation routes, and seasonal activity patterns that could be used to plan more effective raids for acquiring additional transformation subjects. The expanding hybrid population was thus creating a feedback loop that accelerated their growth while increasing their capabilities for future expansion. The regional impact of the hybrid presence extended far beyond direct confrontations with human settlements. Wildlife populations throughout the Ozark region had been fundamentally altered by the presence of apex predators whose hunting capabilities exceeded those of any natural species. Deer, bear, and smaller game animals had developed behavioral modifications that indicated adaptation to predation pressure from creatures that combined the persistence of human hunters with the physical capabilities of large carnivores. More significantly, the hybrid territories had become refugees for other unusual creatures and phenomena that seemed drawn to areas where the boundary between human and animal nature had been disrupted. Crawford's expeditions documented sightings of animals displaying abnormal size or behavior, unexplained phenomena that suggested supernatural influences, and vegetation that showed characteristics not found in adjacent areas unaffected by hybrid presence. By the 1890s, as the American frontier officially closed and wilderness areas became increasingly rare, the Ozark hybrid territories represented one of the few remaining regions where evolutionary processes could operate without human interference. Crawford's final reports suggested that the hybrid population was continuing to evolve at an accelerated rate, developing characteristics that seemed to represent a completely new form of life that was neither human nor animal, but something entirely unprecedented in natural history. Crawford's final expedition in 1895 documented hybrid specimens who had developed capabilities that bordered on the supernatural. These individuals displayed physical modifications that allowed them to survive in environmental conditions that would kill normal humans, process food sources that were toxic to other species, and most remarkably, exhibit forms of collective consciousness that enabled group coordination across vast distances through methods that science could not explain. The hybrid population had also begun experimenting with selective breeding programs designed to enhance specific characteristics in their offspring. Crawford's analysis of their reproductive practices revealed that they were systematically mating individuals who possessed complementary hybrid traits, creating offspring who combined the best physical attributes of both parents while minimizing the genetic defects that sometimes resulted from excessive inbreeding. This deliberate approach to genetic management had produced a new generation of hybrids who were larger, stronger, and more intelligent than their predecessors, while retaining all of the enhanced senses and physical capabilities that made them superior predators. These advanced hybrids were beginning to show characteristics that suggested they might represent an entirely new species rather than simply modified humans. As the 20th century approached, reports of unusual creatures in wilderness areas throughout the American South and Midwest began following patterns that suggested the hybrid population was expanding beyond its original Ozark territory. Sightings of large, upright walking feline creatures were documented in the Appalachian Mountains, the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas, and the remote areas of East Texas, indicating that the hybrid clans had either spread geographically or that similar transformations were occurring in other isolated populations. The development of modern transportation and communication systems in the early 1900s brought new challenges for the hybrid population, as their traditional isolation became increasingly difficult to maintain. However, their superior physical capabilities and accumulated knowledge of human behavior allowed them to adapt to changing conditions while remaining hidden from scientific scrutiny. By the 1920s, when Crawford's successor, Dr. Malcolm Stevens, attempted to conduct follow-up studies in the Ozark region, the hybrid communities had become so sophisticated in their concealment methods that definitive documentation was nearly impossible. The creatures had learned to recognize the signs of scientific expeditions, avoid areas where human observation was likely, and eliminate evidence of their presence with thoroughness that suggested military-level operational security. Stevens's limited observations suggested that the hybrid population had continued evolving at an accelerated rate, developing characteristics that placed them so far from human normalcy that they could no longer be classified as the same species that had given rise to their ancestors. These advanced hybrids displayed intelligence that exceeded human capabilities in some areas, while retaining the enhanced physical attributes that made them supreme predators in their environment. The impact of their continued evolution on regional ecosystems had become profound and irreversible. Wildlife populations throughout the Ozark region had adapted to the presence of apex predators whose capabilities exceeded those of any natural species, creating ecological relationships that were unique in North America. Plants and animals in hybrid territories showed modifications that suggested adaptation to environmental conditions that had been altered by their presence. In modern times, the legacy of the original Cherokee curse continues to influence both folklore and reality throughout the regions where hybrid populations established themselves. The numerous cryptozoological sightings reported throughout the American South, including the beast of Boggy Creek, the Fook monster, and similar creatures, can be traced back to encounters with descendants of the original Wampus Cat clan, who have continued evolving in isolation for over a century. Contemporary genetic research has revealed that isolated human populations, subjected to extreme environmental pressures and limited breeding pools, can indeed develop characteristics that differ significantly from mainstream human genetics. The theoretical framework exists for understanding how supernatural curses might translate into real biological changes that could be passed to offspring and intensified through selective breeding over multiple generations. The story of the Wampus Cat Inbreds serves as both historical record and warning about the potential consequences of disrupting natural balances between human and animal nature. Their continued existence in the remote wilderness areas of America demonstrates that some forms of change, once initiated, cannot be reversed or controlled, and that the boundaries between species may be more fluid than conventional science acknowledges. As wilderness areas continue to shrink and human populations expand into previously unexplored territories, the possibility of renewed contact between civilization and the descendants of the original hybrid clans remains a legitimate concern. For those who understand the true history of the Ozark Mountains and the shadows that still move through their deepest forests on moonless nights, the Wampus Cat legend has become part of American folklore, commemorated in school mascots and local tourism. But the reality behind the stories continues to evolve in hidden territories where the descendants of evening skies pursue their own agenda for survival and expansion in a world that has no place for creatures who exist between the human and animal kingdoms.